for the Anne of Green Gables series. In a way, the story of Anne of Green Gables is about Lucy's own life. Here is a picture of Lucy Maude Montgomery when she was younger. Lucy Maude Montgomery was born in Prince Edward Island on November 30th, 1874. Her mother died when she was just 21 months old. Her dad left her to be raised by her grandparents because he was so devastated by his wife's death. Later, when she was 7, her dad moved to Saskatchewan. Her grandparents raised her strictly in Cavendish, just like Matthew and Marilla Cuthbert, who, although were not Anne's grandparents, still raised Anne strictly. Although she had many relatives who lived close to her, Lucy grew up lonely. Thus, the character of Anne was born. Anne was an orphan and was very lonely until she came to Green Gables, where she met Diana, who would become her bosom friend. Here is a cover for one of the Anne of Green Gables books. Lucy's grandparents' farm came to be the inspiration for Green Gables. Growing up, she often explored the farm. She would also visit her uncle and aunt's Wonder Castle, as she called it. It is located in Kenningston and is now part of the Anne of Green Gables Museum. Her grandfather loved to tell stories which contributes to her imagination. These stories also came to inspire some of her own. She attended church every Sunday, although the services often bored her. She cherished her time in Sunday school. She grew up berry picking, fishing, and collecting shells along the St. Lawrence Gulf and the New London Bay. She grew up as a very sensitive young lady. Just as Lucy was sensitive about being called silly nicknames, Anne was sensitive about her red hair and being called carrots. Although Lucy liked to play with dolls and do other things that were called feminine privileges, she still liked to climb the apple tree, build forts, go on picnics, and scare her friends with ghost stories. She had a habit of giving names to places like the Haunted Woods and the Lake of Shining Waters. Later, when she wrote Anne of Green Gables, she gave the same trait to Anne using some of the names she had made in the book. For example, when Matthew Cuthbert is showing Anne a pond on the way home from the train station, she suggested it should be called the Lake of Shining Waters. In the book, many things happen by the pond. One of them is when Anne and her friends are acting out a dramatic presentation. The boat holding Anne began to sink, and Anne needed Gilbert Blythe's help to get to shore, who she considered to be her arch enemy. Here is the scene in the book. The flat, which is a small rowboat, was accordingly pushed off, scraping roughly over an old embedded stake in the process. For a few minutes, Anne, drifting slowly down, enjoyed the romance of her situation to the full. Then, something happened not at all romantic. The flat began to leak. In a very few moments, it was necessary for Anne to scramble to her feet and gaze blankly at a big crack in the bottom of her barge, through which the water was literally pouring. That sharp stake at the landing had torn up the strip of batting nailed on the flat. Anne did not know this, but it did not take her long to realize that she was in a dangerous plight. At this rate, the flat would fill and sink long before it could reach the lower headland. Where were the oars? Left behind at the landing. Anne gave one gasping little scream which nobody ever heard. She was white to the lips, but she did not lose her self-possession. There was one chance, just one. Anne was horribly frightened, and it seemed like years while the flat was drifting down to the bridge and the water rising in it every moment. She prayed most earnestly, but she didn't shut her eyes to pray, for she knew the only way God could save her was to let the flat float close enough to one of the bridge piles for her to climb up on it. Anne knew the piles were just old tree trunks, and there were lots of knots and old branch stubs on them. It was proper to pray, but she had to do her part by watching out, and right well she knew it. She just said, "God, dear God, please take the flat close to a pile, and I'll do the rest," over and over again. Under such circumstances, she didn't think much about making a flowery prayer, but hers was answered, for the flat bumped right into a pile for a minute, and Anne flung the scarf and the shawl over her shoulder and scrambled up on a big providential stub. And there she was, clinging to that slippery old pile with no way of getting up or down. It was a very unromantic position, but Anne didn't think about it at the time. You don't think much about romance when you have just escaped from a watery grave. Anne said a grateful prayer at once, and then gave all her attention to holding on tight, for she knew she would probably have to depend on human aid to get back to dry land. Help would soon come, but meanwhile, her position was a very uncomfortable one. The minutes passed by, each seeming an hour to the unfortunate Lily Maid. Why didn't somebody come? Where had the girls gone? Suppose they had fainted, one and all. Suppose nobody ever came. Suppose her arms grew so tired and cramped that she could hold on no longer. Anne looked at the wicked green depths below her, wavering with long, oily shadows, and shivered. Her imagination began to suggest all manner of gruesome possibilities to her. Then, just as she thought she could not endure the ache in her arms another moment, Gilbert Blythe came rowing under the bridge in a dory, which is a small rowboat. Gilbert glanced up, and much to his amazement beheld a little white, scornful face looking down upon him with big, frightened, but also scornful gray eyes. "Anne Shirley, how on earth did you get there?" he exclaimed. Without waiting for an answer, he pulled close to the pile and extended his hand. There was no help for it. Anne, clinging to Gilbert Blythe's hand, scrambled down into the dory where she sat, jawbone furious in the stern, with her arms full of dripping shawl and wet crepe. It was certainly extremely difficult to be dignified under the circumstances. "What has happened, Anne?" asked Gilbert, taking up his oars. "We are playing Elaine," explained Anne frigidly, without even looking at her rescuer. "And I was to drift down to Camelot in the barge. The flat. The flat began to leak, and I climbed out on the pile. The girls went for help. Will you be kind enough to row me to the landing?" Gilbert obligingly rowed to the landing, and Anne, disdaining assistance, sprang nimbly on shore. That completes the scene from the book. All through her life, Lucy Maude Montgomery would write short hymns on small scraps of paper. She would then stick them in her journal. She would also write short stories and poems in her journal. In her mid-teens, she sold many of these to magazines across North America. When she was 34, Lucy Maude Montgomery first published Anne of Green Gables in 1908 with her first publisher. It was a great success, and Lucy continued writing Anne books to 1939 with 3 other publishers. She continued writing for the rest of her life. By the time she had passed away, Lucy Maude Montgomery had written 22 novels and books of short stories, not including 1 book of poetry. She passed away in Toronto on April 24, 1942. She was 68 when she died. Since then, many movies and TV shows have been made about Anne of Green Gables and the other characters she had created. Although she was a virtual orphan, Lucy Maude Montgomery had become one of Canada's greatest female authors. Thank you.